In the previous movie, I showed you how to filter your pivot table visually using a slicer. In this movie, I'll show you how to work with slicers to change their format so that they fit more effectively in your worksheet. I will use the Format Slicer sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 3 folder of your exercise files archive. As a quick review, a slicer is a visual representation of a filter that's been applied to a pivot table field. In this case, I'll just create a slicer for the region field. So I'll check that box and click OK. And just for demonstration purposes, I'll filter so that only the south region is displayed. When the slicer is selected, the Options contextual tab appears on the ribbon, and I have a number of tools that I can use to change the slicer and its formatting. For example, over on the right side in the size group, I can change its height and width. So if I wanted to make it smaller, say take it down to 1.5 inches, I can just type 1.5 in the height box, type enter. I can also resize the slicer by dragging its handles. So if I want to make it taller, I can just go to the bottom edge and drag the middle handle, drag that down and it resizes. Same thing here. If I want to make it wider, I can do so. If I want to change its height and width at the same time, then I can drag one of the corner controls. You can also change the size of the buttons. To do that, just go to the buttons group, and let's say I want to make the buttons a little bit narrower. They're currently 0.26 of an inch, so just over a quarter. Let's say that I want to make it 0.15, so 15/100ths of an inch. I'll type that in the height box, press enter, and now the buttons are smaller. If I want to make them thinner, I can change the value in the width box, say from 1.79 inches to 1.4, press enter, and the buttons are resized. If a field contains a lot of values, you can also increase the number of columns in the slicer. So if I wanted to make this slicer 2-column, I can do that just by clicking the up arrow on the spin control next to the columns field, and doing so adds a second column of buttons to the region slicer. You can also change the appearance of the slicer using a style, and they appear here in the Slicer Styles gallery. You can display the entire gallery by clicking the More button, and that displays all the styles that are available to you, or if you want, you can also create a new slicer style. Let's say that I want my slicer to stand apart from this dark blue theme that I have here for the pivot table, so I'll use an orange and gray theme. So I'll click that style, and doing so applies it to the slicer. And if I make the buttons larger, 1/4 of an inch, then you can see the impact of the formatting much more clearly. Those are the basics of formatting slicers. Change them any way you need to get your message across effectively. Don't be afraid to use a little bit of color so it's easy for your audience to see which values are in the pivot table and which are currently out because of a filter.